They said her bones had never hardened. That's why the grave was shallow, no deeper than a spade's length, just enough dirt to hide the smell. But bones don't rot in a single season, not when the soil is that thin and the rains come heavy. In the spring of 1904, a dog dug her up. First the ribs, small as kindling, then the jaw, still locked as if she'd died mid-scream. And when the townspeople gathered to see, they found something else buried with her. A rosary of human teeth, strung together on blackened thread, coiled around her spine like a second skeleton. The preacher said it was witchcraft. The doctor said it was disease. But the oldest among them, those who remembered the family, said nothing at all. They just turned away and walked back into the trees, leaving the remains half exposed. Like a wound the earth itself refused to close. Her name had been recorded once, only once, in a census that later went missing. Ada May, age 10. No birth certificate. No school enrollment. No proof she had ever existed outside that shallow grave. But the valley had not forgotten. They whispered about the cabin where she lived, the way the windows were nailed shut from the inside, the way no visitor ever saw the mother and father in the same room together. Some swore the mother was too young. Others swore she was too old, her face shifting with the light like a trick of the eyes. And when Ada May's belly began to swell, the neighbors looked away. No one knocked. No one asked. By the time the midwife was called, the child was already crowning. What was born that night didn't breathe, didn't cry. Its skin was translucent, veined like a leaf, its mouth filled with teeth too sharp, too many. The midwife tried to hide it in the fire, but Ada May had seen. She had watched in silence, wide-eyed, until the cord was cut and the thing was gone. That night, she stopped speaking. 4 months later, she was dead. Official cause fever. But no fever leaves carvings inside a child's womb. No fever leaves teeth strung together in a rosary. Someone had done that. Someone who believed in keeping bloodlines clean. Before we go deeper into this story, tell me something. Which city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? The valley lies in eastern Tennessee, though old maps name it differently, a shaded hollow between ridges where the rivers narrow and vanish into stone. Today the place is called Silt Creek, but in the 1800s it was marked on county records only as unsettled, not because no one lived there, but because no one claimed responsibility for what lived there. The land was poor for farming, too rocky for cattle, and too far from the railroads to bring profit. Only the desperate stayed, the outcasts, the ones who wanted to be forgotten. The first cabins were built without nails, just logs notched into each other, roofs sagging under moss. Families carried names that never appeared again outside that valley. Feathers, Odell Cray. Bloodlines knotted. Fathers sharing wives with sons, sisters traded as if they were livestock. The courthouse kept trying to track them, but records disappeared, misplaced, stolen, sometimes even burned. In 1879, the clerk wrote in the margin of the census book, "Hollow families refusing enumeration, too dangerous to press." Those words were later crossed out, but the ink bled through the page. You can still read them if you hold the paper to the light. By the turn of the century, outsiders knew not to linger there. Travelers spoke of eyes watching from the tree line, pale and unblinking. A schoolteacher who tried to start a parish class vanished after just 3 weeks, leaving behind a single slate scratched with 3 crooked letters, AMA. When Ada May was born a decade later, the old ones said she was marked from the beginning. Her family's cabin stood at the farthest end of the hollow, its roof collapsing inward like a mouth caving in on rotten teeth. The chimney smoked even in summer, as if fire was the only thing keeping something inside at bay. They grew no crops, bought nothing in town. No one saw them hunt or fish, yet they survived. Always meat on the table, though neighbors whispered it wasn't animal. The forest around their land grew twisted. Trees bent in the same direction, as if pulled by unseen weight. Birds never nested there. Deer avoided the clearing. At night, pale figures were glimpsed at the edge of the brush, watching but never stepping forward, and sometimes, just before dawn, you could hear a sound drifting down the ridge. Not a scream, not a song, but something caught between the two, like a child humming through clenched teeth. The county doctor wrote once that Silt Creek was not a place of medicine, but of contagion. He warned that whatever illness bred, there was not of the body, but of the blood. That note was filed in 1903, the year before Ada Mae's shallow grave was dug. Her story didn't begin with her. It began with the land. Ada Mae was not the first child born in the hollow, but she was the first they whispered about by name. Her mother was said to be no older than 14 when she delivered her, pale and brittle, boned, with hair so thin it clung in strings to her temples. No one ever named the father. Some claimed he was the same man who fetched the midwife. A man with eyes the color of rain, soaked ash, who never spoke above a whisper. Others swore it was his own father, long dead, whose grave lay sunken and unmarked beneath a crooked oak just steps from the cabin door. From her first breath, Ada Mae carried strangeness with her. Her cries were faint, hollow, as though the air slipped right through her throat. Her skin never flushed, not with fever, not with cold, not with sun, and her eyes, one a watery blue, the other dark as coal, seemed to shift in color depending on the light, flickering, almost changing. The midwife who brought her into the world swore the infant's gaze was not that of a newborn, but of someone older, someone waiting. She did not play with the other hollow children. When they gathered at the creek to skip stones or chase crawfish, she stood on the bank and watched in silence, her small hands clenched behind her back. One boy swore she whispered his name, though her lips never moved, and when he asked how she knew it, she only smiled and pointed at the sky. By the time he reached home that evening, his nose was bleeding. By morning, his bed was soaked through. The doctor could not explain it. At night, Ada Mae would wander. More than once a neighbor claimed to see her walking barefoot through the fields, her nightdress dragging in the dew, head tilted as if listening to something beneath the soil. When they called out to her, she turned but did not answer. She would simply raise one hand, thin as a bird's wing, and press a finger to her lips before vanishing back into the dark. Her drawings unsettled even those who pitied her. On scraps of birch bark and flattened sacks, she etched shapes no child should know, circles within circles, lines intersecting in crooked symmetry, figures with too many arms, too many mouths. When her mother tried to burn them, Ada Mae wept for the first and only time. The sound, neighbors said, was not of grief but of something breaking loose inside her. The preacher refused to baptize her. Not fit for the water, he told her family, though no record of that sermon exists. Still, his words lived on in whispers, and the people of Silt Creek began crossing themselves whenever the girl passed by. They said she wasn't a child at all, but an echo, a vessel, the beginning of something the hollow had been breeding for generations, and when her belly began to swell at 10 years old, those whispers turned into silence. No one asked, no one dared. By winter, Ada Mae's belly had grown, so tight it looked as though her skin might split. Her mother wrapped her in wool and kept her hidden, but in the hollow, nothing remained hidden for long. Children whispered about hearing muffled cries from the Blackburn cabin at night, not of pain, but of something older, a chant, low and rhythmic, echoing through the cracks of the log walls. The midwife was called again, though this time not by choice. Reuben Blackburn himself came down from the ridge, his hands black with dirt, his face streaked, as though he had been clawing the earth with bare fingers. He told her Ada May was ill, that fever had taken her mind. But when the woman entered the cabin, the truth stood in plain sight. The child was on a bed of straw, her legs drawn, her stomach pulsing with something alive inside. What unnerved the midwife most were the carvings. Strips of skin along Ada May's thighs bore shallow cuts, not deep enough to bleed out, but marked with precision. 3 lines, then 3 more, crossing at angles that formed a jagged star. Her mother swore the marks had appeared overnight, as if drawn by a hand that was not human. But when the midwife washed the blood away, Ada May's lips curled into a smile, and she whispered the words, "Not my fault." Animals began dying. A hound was found gutted. Entrails arranged in a circle outside the cabin door. Chickens went missing, not a feather left behind. A cow staggered into the creek, its hide carved with the same star-shaped lines found on Ada May. The sheriff rode up once, but he never crossed the clearing. From the tree line he watched, his horse restless beneath him, until Ada May lifted her head from the window and stared directly at him. He turned back without a word and filed no report. The strangest signs came in the hours before dawn. Neighbors swore they saw faint lights in the trees above the cabin, flickering like lanterns, but too high to be carried by hand. Others claimed to hear 2 voices murmuring inside the house, one belonging to the girl, the other low and rasping, like stone dragged across stone. No man was ever seen entering or leaving. As the birth drew near, Ada May's body changed. Her skin grew grey. Her hair fell out in brittle clumps. Her eyes clouded until only a thin yellow ring remained. She no longer walked the fields. Instead, she crawled, dragging herself on all 4s like an animal, her hands knotted, her nails blackened. The night she delivered, the cabin windows shook with her screams. But it was not the sound of labor. It was something deeper, a sound that did not belong in the throat of a child. Those who heard it swore they felt their own bones vibrate, teeth rattling in their skulls. And when the infant came, it came too quickly, as though it had been waiting for the moment all along. The birth was not recorded. No doctor signed a certificate, no preacher offered a prayer. What happened in that room lived only in whispers, passed from one trembling mouth to another. The midwife said the infant was wrong, its skin thin as paper, veins spreading across its body like black roots, its jaw too large, crowded with teeth that had no business being there. Some said it never drew a breath, that it came into the world still and silent. Others claimed it screamed without lungs, a shriek that didn't come from its mouth, but from the very walls of the cabin. Either way, it was gone before dawn. Burned, buried, hidden, no one knew. But the girl, Ada May, she remained. And it was then that people began putting the pieces together. Her mother was scarcely more than a child herself. When Ada May was born, her eyes vacant, her words slurred like she had never learned to speak properly. Some said she was Reuben Blackburn's daughter, others swore she was his sister, but most agreed on one thing. She had never left that hollow until the day the midwife was dragged to her bedside. There were no records of marriage, no records of birth, just graves. Shallow graves behind the cabin, each marked with stones too small to be noticed, too crude to be sanctified. No preacher had blessed the ground, and when the sheriff once asked about them, Reuben's only answer was, "We keep our own. Bloodlines are meant to branch, to grow outward." But in Silt Creek, the lines folded inward, turning upon themselves, looping like a noose. Father became brother, sister became wife. Children were born with mismatched eyes, twisted spines, mouths full of broken teeth. And when they died, as so many did, their names were buried along with them. No witnesses, no headstones, just silence. Ada Mae's eyes told the truth others tried to hide. One the color of her mother's, watery blue. The other identical to Reuben's gray, ringed in a waxy yellow. Blood revealed what words concealed. The preacher, who once refused her baptism, spoke again after the birth. In his sermon, he told the congregation that the Lord marks sin upon the flesh, and sin will eat its way back to the root. Though he never named the family, everyone understood. The Blackburns had carried their own curse, and Ada Mae was the proof. But curses don't stay locked behind cabin walls. They seep, they stain, they spread. And in the months after the birth, something began to fester in the hollow. Fields turned barren. Livestock miscarried. A stillborn calf was found with a face too human to be mistaken. The townspeople wanted answers. But when they looked toward the Blackburn cabin, no one found the courage to knock. The Blackburn name was never spoken in church again. It wasn't forbidden by rule, only by fear. Those who dared say it in daylight spoke in low voices, as though the hollow itself were listening. By night, no one uttered it at all. What frightened the townspeople most wasn't what they knew, it was what they didn't. No one could say for sure where the child had gone. Some claimed Reuben buried it beneath the cabin floor. Others swore it was carried into the woods, left for the owls and coyotes. But when hunters followed the trails beyond the ridge, they found claw marks in the trees, higher than any animal could reach, and bones scattered in a spiral, stripped clean. The midwife who delivered the child vanished weeks later. Her cabin was found empty, the hearth cold, a cup still half filled with water by the bed. No tracks, no signs of struggle, just gone. Folks whispered she had been taken for knowing too much, that the Blackburns had silenced her, or worse, that Ada Mae herself had gone crawling in the night to claim her. Soon, families began packing wagons. They didn't call it fleeing, but that's what it was. Whole households abandoned their farms, leaving tools rusting in the fields and wells unsealed. Some said they were moving west for richer soil, others that they sought work in the mines. But in truth, they wanted distance. You could feel the shadow of that hollow creeping further each season, and no one wanted to wake one day to find it at their doorstep. The sheriff came once more, this time with a group of men. They went up the ridge carrying rifles and kerosene. Folks waited at the base of the trail, listening for shots, for shouts, for anything. Instead, the woods grew quiet, as though sound itself had been swallowed. When the men returned at dawn, only 2 of them came back. They said nothing, just loaded their horses and left town by noon. The sheriff's badge was found nailed to a tree weeks later, rusted and bent. It was then the preacher declared the Blackburns no longer existed. He ordered the records burned. Birth ledgers, land claims, baptism rolls. Pages were torn from the courthouse Bible. The name was scrubbed clean from history. They are not of us, he told his flock. They are not of God. And so the hollow was left to rot. The cabin sagged. The roof caved in, the graves sank into the soil. Children were warned never to play near it, and if a hunter strayed too far, He'd return pale and shaken, swearing he'd heard crying under the earth. But Ada May lived on. She was seen years later. Gaunt and bent, her face drawn long, her hair gone white before its time. Some said she wandered the woods muttering. Some said she carried bundles that shifted and whimpered in her arms. By then, no one dared ask. She was not considered human anymore, but something else. The last remnant of a bloodline that had turned inward on itself until it collapsed. And yet, even after her death, if death ever truly came, the people of Silt Creek swore the blood never left. Children born in town sometimes carried eyes too light, or jaws too wide, or hands with more fingers than ought to be. Their parents cursed it bad luck, or the mountain's touch. But the old ones knew. They always knew. The Blackburn blood had spread, quiet as rot in the roots of a tree. And in the right season, it would rise again. Time passed. Decades blurred into generations, and the Blackburn name was scrubbed clean from every ledger, every Bible, every courthouse record. To newcomers, the hollow was nothing but a ruin, a sagging cabin swallowed by vines, stones sinking into moss, graves without names. But the old families remembered. They always remembered. Children were warned not to wander near the ridge. Hunters avoided the woods after dusk, and when livestock turned up mangled or crops withered overnight, whispers rose like smoke, the blood is stirring again. By the turn of the century, the story had curdled into a ghost tale. They said Ada May still walked the hollow, her bones bent, her mouth a permanent grin, cradling something wrapped in rags that whimpered when the wind cut sharp. Others claimed the family never died at all, that the inbreeding had bred them into something no longer human, something that crawled in caves and fed on carrion. But there were signs that could not be denied. A boy born with double pupils in each eye, a girl whose teeth came in sharp, jagged as glass, men with jaws too heavy, voices too low, hands with an extra thumb. Folks said it was chance, misfortune. The old ones shook their heads. They had seen those faces before, back when Ada May had smiled through split lips and whispered, "Not my fault." When the highway came through the county, surveyors mapped the hollow, but the road was bent away from it. No one ever said why. The maps showed nothing there, only forest and stone. But when the bulldozers pushed too close, engines failed and men quit, saying the trees felt wrong, leaning when no wind blew. Now, the hollow sits silent, but silence does not mean empty. At night, hikers swear they see faint lights in the trees, too high to be lanterns, too steady to be fireflies. Some hear crying, others laughter, a child's voice, though no children live for miles. And if you walk too close to the old cabin, some say you'll hear two voices, still one young and broken, the other low, rasping, patient. The records may be gone, the names erased, but the blood never leaves. It seeps into soil, into water, into womb. It waits. And if you should ever find yourself near Silt Creek Hollow, with night falling fast and the woods pressing close, remember this: the Blackburns kept their own. But sometimes, their own come looking for you.